You know, sometimes a story begins with something so small that no one could have guessed how big it would become. A single choice, an act of pride, and a stubborn refusal to back down can shake an entire neighborhood. Imagine this. A man who once wore his country's uniform, stood under blazing suns and marched through storms, finally finds peace in his own home. On his porch, he raises a flag, not just fabric, but a symbol of sacrifice, freedom, and everything he fought for. Yet in the middle of his calm suburban street, the very symbol he defended becomes a weapon used against him by the people who claim to protect the community. This is not just a story about a flag, it's a story of respect, defiance, and a fight that no one saw coming. And trust me, you'll want to stay until the end, because the way this battle ends will leave you stunned. It all started with Tom, a retired Army veteran in his early 60s who had recently moved into a quiet neighborhood governed by a notoriously strict HOA. Tom wasn't flashy, he wasn't the kind to cause drama, and most of the time, he kept to himself. His joy was simple: his small front porch, his rocking chair, and the sight of the American flag flying proudly on the pole he had installed by his front steps. For him, it was not decoration, it was honor. He had seen too many brothers fall in uniform for that flag to ever be just cloth. At first, the flag barely got noticed. Neighbors waved to Tom as they passed by, some even thanking him for his service. Kids on bikes would point at the flag, and Tom would smile and salute them, a small gesture that made him feel connected to his community. Everything seemed peaceful until the letters started. One morning, Tom opened his mailbox to find an envelope with the HOA's seal stamped neatly in the corner. He didn't think much of it. Maybe it was just a reminder about trash day or a notice for lawn maintenance. But when he tore it open, the words made his hands clench. Violation, unauthorized structure, immediate removal required. The structure they were referring to was his flagpole. Tom was stunned. Surely this had to be a mistake. How could anyone call a flagpole unauthorized? He read on. The HOA claimed that the flagpole did not fit the neighborhood's aesthetic standards and was not approved by the board. They demanded he remove it within 10 days or face fines of $100 per day. At first, Tom laughed bitterly. Surely they wouldn't actually enforce something so ridiculous. But deep down, he knew HOAs had a reputation for being relentless. He decided to attend the next board meeting to clear things up. After all, surely once they heard his side, they'd back down, right? The meeting was held in the neighborhood's community center, a spotless little hall where the HOA board sat behind a long table, armed with clipboards and rules that seemed thicker than law books. Tom took a seat among the handful of other residents there, and when it was his turn to speak, he stood tall, cleared his throat, and spoke with the calm confidence of a man who had faced real battles. "I fought for this country," he said firmly. "That flag doesn't just belong to me. It belongs to all of us. You can't tell me I don't have the right to fly it in front of my own home." But the board members, stiff and expressionless, simply referred to their regulations. "Mr. Johnson," the HOA president said in a cold, rehearsed tone, "while we respect your service, rules are rules. Poles of that height are not permitted without prior approval. You may fly your flag from a bracket attached to your house, but the freestanding pole must be removed." Tom could feel the heat rising in his chest. "So what you're saying," he shot back, "is that the very symbol of freedom I fought for offends your sense of aesthetics? You think a pole is more dangerous to this community than the disrespect of telling a veteran he can't raise his flag?" There was a silence in the room. Some neighbors shifted uncomfortably, a few even nodding slightly in support. But the board didn't budge. The violation notice stood. Tom had 10 days. When Tom got home that night, he sat on his porch staring at the flag. It rippled softly in the evening breeze, the fading sunlight making the red and blue glow against the sky. He thought about taking it down, just to avoid the hassle. But then he thought about the people who never came home, the funerals where families clutched folded flags like lifelines, and the battles fought under that very symbol. No, he wasn't taking it down. Not now. Not ever. The next day, Tom called a lawyer. Tom thought calling a lawyer would be a straightforward process. After all, there had to be laws protecting veterans' rights to fly the American flag, right? His lawyer, a middle-aged woman named Sarah with a sharp wit and a reputation for going head-to-head with HOAs, confirmed that suspicion. "Tom," she said during their first meeting, "you're not just dealing with an overzealous HOA. You're dealing with people who love control. But here's the thing. Federal law allows you to display the flag as long as it's done in a reasonable manner. They can't outright ban it, they're just banking on the fact that most people won't fight back." That was all Tom needed to hear. He wasn't most people. Within a week, Sarah had sent a formal letter to the HOA citing the Freedom to Display the American Flag Act. The board's response? Silence. At least at first. But silence, Tom would soon learn, was only the calm before the storm. The fines started arriving. $100 a day, $700 a week. By the end of the first month, the HOA claimed Tom owed them $3,000 in violations. Each letter was delivered with cold, legalistic wording, but Tom could feel the hostility between the lines. It wasn't just about a poll anymore, it was about power, and the HOA wasn't about to lose. Neighbors began to take notice too. Some were quietly supportive, stopping Tom on their evening walks to whisper, "We're with you, but we don't want trouble." Others, though, seemed to side with the board. One morning, Tom woke to find a note taped to his door that read, "Rules keep communities safe. Take it down." Still, the flag flew. Sarah urged Tom to stay strong. "This is exactly what they want, you to cave. But the law is on your side. Let them rack up the fines. We'll take it to court if we have to." And so the standoff grew. Every day Tom sat on his porch sipping his morning coffee, staring proudly at the flag as it swayed above him. It became more than a personal statement. It became a quiet act of defiance. But the HOA wasn't finished. One afternoon, Tom returned from the grocery store to find two board members standing in his yard, clipboards in hand, inspecting his property like detectives at a crime scene. "Excuse me," Tom said, his voice sharp. "What exactly do you think you're doing on my lawn?" The HOA president, a gray-haired man named Richard, didn't flinch. "Documenting violations," he replied flatly. "Your grass is half an inch taller than the regulations allow, and your driveway has oil stains that need to be cleaned. If you refuse to comply, we will continue issuing fines." Tom's jaw tightened. "You think this is about grass? About oil stains? This is about a flag you don't like, and we both know it." Richard smirked. Rules are rules. Tom's fists clenched, but he held back. He wasn't going to give them the satisfaction of seeing him lose his cool. Instead, he walked past them, went into his house, and called Sarah. "They're escalating," he said. "They're on my lawn now." Sarah sighed. "Classic harassment. Keep records of everything. Photos, videos, dates, times. The more evidence we have, the better this will go when we file." That night, Tom sat in his living room with a notebook in hand, documenting everything. Every letter, every fine, every encounter. He wasn't just defending his right to fly the flag anymore. He was building a case. And then, something unexpected happened. The story began to spread. One of Tom's neighbors, a younger man who admired his stand but hadn't dared to speak up, posted about it on social media. The post read, "Veteran in my neighborhood being fined thousands by HOA for flying the American flag. This is wrong. Within days, the post blew up. Local news stations picked it up. Reporters started showing up on Tom's street. Camera crews filmed the flag waving proudly above his porch as Tom stood beside it, telling his story in a calm but powerful voice. "I didn't fight for this country to be told I can't honor it in my own front yard," he told one reporter. Suddenly, Tom wasn't just fighting his HOA. He was becoming the face of a much larger battle. Strangers from across the country sent letters of support. Some even mailed checks to help cover his mounting fines. Veterans groups rallied behind him, demanding the HOA back off. But the HOA wasn't backing down. If anything, the publicity seemed to harden their resolve. At the next board meeting, Richard announced that the fines would continue, and if necessary, The association would pursue legal action to place a lien on Tom's home. The room erupted. Neighbors who had once stayed silent now stood and shouted, "This is wrong. You can't do that. It's his right." The board struggled to maintain order, but the damage was done. The community was no longer quietly compliant. As Tom walked out of that meeting, a dozen neighbors followed him. For the first time, he didn't feel alone in the fight. The HOA wanted to make an example of him. Instead, they had created a movement. And Tom knew one thing for certain. This battle was far from over. The weeks that followed were a blur of tension, paperwork, and media attention. Tom's story had grown far beyond his neighborhood. National news outlets began covering it. Veterans groups organized rallies outside the HOA office, and people across the country started calling Richard and the board members unpatriotic tyrants online. Tom hadn't asked for fame. He hadn't asked for attention. All he wanted was the simple right to fly the flag he had bled for. But now, the fight was much bigger than him. It had become symbolic of something every homeowner feared, the unchecked power of an HOA. The HOA board, however, seemed blind to the outrage. They doubled down on their threats. A letter arrived on Tom's doorstep stamped in bold red letters. Final notice: pay $7,600 in accrued fines or face legal action. Sarah, his lawyer, read the letter with a raised eyebrow. "They've just handed us everything we need. This isn't about community standards anymore. It's harassment, plain and simple. We'll file in court, and I promise you, Tom, we'll win." Tom nodded. He trusted her, but the thought of going to court made his stomach churn. He had faced combat, but this was a different kind of battlefield, one where paperwork and technicalities mattered more than courage. Still, he refused to back down. When the court date finally arrived, the small county courthouse was packed. Supporters lined the benches, many dressed in patriotic colors, waving miniature flags. Reporters filled the back row, cameras at the ready. On one side of the aisle sat Tom, Sarah, and several veterans who had come to stand with him. On the other side sat Richard and the HOA board, dressed in matching suits, looking smug and unbothered. The judge, a stern woman with silver hair, called the case to order. "Tom versus Maplewood Estates Homeowners Association," she announced. Sarah rose first. She didn't waste time with theatrics. Instead, she laid out the facts. Tom was a veteran with a legal right under the Freedom to Display the American Flag Act to fly the flag. The HOA's escalating fines, their attempts to enter his property, their harassment. It was all not only unlawful, but an abuse of power. She played video clips Tom had taken of the board members trespassing on his lawn. She submitted copies of the letters demanding thousands of dollars in fines. She even read aloud some of the hateful anonymous notes Tom had received, arguing that the HOA had fueled hostility in the community by singling him out. Then Richard stood. His argument was clinical, almost robotic. He insisted this wasn't about patriotism. It was about uniformity and community standards. The flagpole, he argued, was unsightly and violated agreed-upon rules. "If we allow one exception," Richard said, "the entire neighborhood will fall apart." The judge listened, expressionless. When both sides had finished, she leaned forward. "Mr. Tom," she said, "you are correct. Federal law protects your right to display the American flag. This court finds that the HOA's actions were not only unreasonable, but retaliatory. The fines are null and void." Gasps filled the courtroom. Richard's face turned red as the judge continued. "Furthermore, this court orders the HOA to cease all harassment, reimburse Mr. Tom for his legal fees, and amend their bylaws to align with federal law. If they fail to comply, they will face sanctions." The gavel came down. Case closed. Bang. For the first time in months, Tom felt the weight lift from his shoulders. Supporters in the courtroom broke into applause. Some stood, clapping and cheering. A reporter shouted, "Tom, how does it feel to win?" Tom smiled, but his voice was steady, calm. "This isn't about me winning. It's about standing up for what's right. The American flag belongs to all of us, and no HOA, no matter how powerful they think they are, can take that away. Outside the courthouse, the scene was electric. Veterans shook Tom's hand, neighbors who had once stayed silent hugged him, and strangers thanked him for his courage. Even some of the HOA's former supporters admitted the board had gone too far. The fallout for the HOA was swift. Several board members resigned in disgrace, including Richard, whose smug confidence had evaporated under the weight of public outrage. The community demanded reforms, voting in new leadership that promised fairness and common sense over strict control. Tom, though, didn't gloat. He didn't celebrate with champagne or speeches. That evening, he simply returned home, walked onto his porch, and looked up at the flag swaying proudly above him. For him, that was enough. But the story didn't end there. Local news outlets continued to cover his case, turning Tom into a symbol of resistance against overreaching HOAs across the country. Calls poured in from homeowners facing similar struggles, asking for advice, encouragement, and hope. And while Tom never asked to be anyone's hero, he couldn't deny that something bigger had come from his fight. He had proven that one person, with enough determination and the courage to stand alone, could inspire change. That night, as the sun set behind the flag, casting it in a golden glow, Tom whispered quietly to himself, "This is the America I fought for." And the flag waved on, no longer just a symbol of a nation, but of victory, freedom, and the power of never backing down.